Always Bo Broadbeck here with Auburn University, and it's always a pleasure to be the host and co-moderator on this webinar series. We have a great webinar for you today. We have two presenters, which is going to make it, I think, a lot more fun as we get going today. And then Heath is going to talk about some of our upcoming webinars that we have for the rest of the fall. But I'll see you all at the end of the webinar when we go to the Q&A. But I'll turn it over to my co-moderator, Heath Hubke, to give us some of the updates on Tree Fund.
Thank you, Bo, and thank you all for attending today. Many of you, this will be your first experience with Tree Fund, Tree Research, and Education Endowment, and we welcome you. So we are a nonprofit that one of our goals and missions is the grants and the projects that we fund and support. We want to make sure that gets in the hands of those that need it the most, which would be you. And so we thank our sponsors, those that support us with their funds, their money, to say that the mission of Tree Fund is worth it, and we want to keep it going. And so it's thanks to them and other donors. Many of you are on here today that have made this eligible to be free for all that would like to attend today's webinar. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for those that have donated and supported us over the past 10 years. 2025 marks the 10-year anniversary of the Tree Fund webinar series, and Bo is our veteran in leadership with that. And I think, at the time 10 years ago, he was hoping for 50 or 60 people, and right now I think we've got over 1,000. So they're not Zoom is not letting me know the specifics beyond 1,000 people here right now today. So thank you all for attending and for helping this grow, and more so using the information you find today and using it in your own communities. But again, a lot of you may not know who Tree Fund is, and so I want to try to do my best to give a little snippet for those that might not know us that well. And so as you look at a tree, there's lots going on to it, as you all know, but starting at the bottom are roots. This is the part that you don't see, that maybe not gets the attention that it deserves, but these are our Tree Fund donors, our organizations that partner with us, that make things available, those that fundraise under the ground, behind the scenes, however you want to call it. And then we have our trunk, which is going to move that information, get that stuff publicly, the things that we want to really be able to see when it comes to Tree Fund. And so that's going to make up our volunteers, our staff, that we, and our grants, those that are reviewing our grants and making sure that the best projects are being put forward. As you look at the canopy, we hope that you're going to see our research grants. The work that JD and Tim put together today, the many projects that we fund throughout the year, our scholarships. This past year, we were able to support 10 individuals with $5,000 scholarships to study in the arboricultural field. And these are our future leaders, our future researchers that we're able to see. And then we have education awards that are helping communities learn more about trees. But really today, we're going to be looking at the fruit, right? We're going to look at what comes from the research, one of those things being the webinars. So our Tree Fund webinar series is something that we're very proud of and thankful that you're able to attend today. Other things that you may see that we would consider our fruit: improved practices, ANSI impacts, journal publications, arborist safety recommendations and practices, and so on and so forth. So a very highlight, but I know a lot of you are not familiar with Tree Fund, and so we wanted to give a little bit of an understanding for you that may have your first exposure to who we are. And if you want to continue the support with us, please consider a donation going to treefund.org. You'll see a donate now page. And again, that work, those funds go back into the work of making these projects, research happen. So we're very thankful for those that donate and support us. As we look at today's presentation, we do have a Q&A function. I do want to point that out. So if you have questions that we hope at the end of the time you want to be able to ask JD and Tim, please put those in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those as able. Otherwise, the chat doesn't need to be used too much. We've got your ISA, your CEU information when you registered. We know who you are, how long you attend, all those wonderful pieces. And so we will be submitting your CEUs to ISA. If you do need a certificate of attendance, please email education@treefund.org. And as a friendly reminder, we've got over 1,000 people today, so it's going to take time for us to get back to you. It's going to take time for ISA to get those CEUs put in there. We still do have 2 more webinars coming up for the rest of the year. We've got optimizing tree responses to root pruning in mature trees next month. And I do want to make note that this is a 2-hour later time difference. Justin Morganroth is coming to us from New Zealand, and they're about 16, 17 hours ahead of myself here in the Midwest. So he will be waking up on Wednesday morning early to be able to present to all of us, hopefully on a Tuesday afternoon for us. So please make note of that it will be Tuesday for you. And I put the wrong date on there. It's Tuesday, November 4th. So I will make sure that after this we will send an email, but it's Tuesday, November 4th that he will be presenting to us. And then on December, we've got Stella D presenting her assessing the mechanical, physiological, and carbon accounting effects of different pruning regimens. And we are working on our 2026 programs as it is. All right. And lastly, I do want to, we do have JD Brown. He will be presenting today, and he is going to be presenting his findings and work from the Bob Skiera John White Grant Program, which has a primary goal of funding projects to help arborists and urban foresters communicate the value of trees and urban forests on a global basis through technology transfer and engagement with developers, builders, civil engineers, city planners, many of the people that you are, you either interact with every day or some of you are. So as a lawyer and planner, JD explores the intersection of urban planning and policy frameworks to help cities nurture abundant, biodiverse, and equitably accessible nature. He has authored an array of guiding documents to assist cities and practitioners in implementing the concepts of cities and nature-based policies and practices. JD collaborates with partners from cities around the world to shape, innovate mechanisms to integrate nature into the daily lives of urban residents. So JD, thank you for attending today. I will stop sharing here and ask that you share.
Great. Well, thanks, Heath, for the introduction. And wow, it's wonderful to be here with such a wonderful audience today. And international in scope. I think probably what Tim and I will be sharing. Tim Beatley is also joining me, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to show some of the research that we've done in the last year, looking specifically at different strategies, policy strategies. So I think a little bit different maybe than what most of the webinars that you attend cover. This is looking at the legal policies and practices that cities have put in place to protect mature trees on private land. So specifically thinking about that portion of these urban areas that are privately owned. So a different strategy, I think, mindset than for those public lands. Just a little bit about ourselves real quickly. So Biophilic Cities Network, based at the University of Virginia. And we do lots of things, but one of the important things we do is facilitate a global network with about 50% US cities, about 50% cities from around the world, but all thinking about how do we create the opportunity for nature to be integrated into cities so that it's part of our daily life. And so trees are a big piece of that. And so that's the focus of what we have been looking at specifically for the last year, but also as part of this new Center for Forest Urbanism, which we are launching just next week, actually, with a symposium at the University of Virginia. But why are we talking about urban trees? What are the benefits of urban trees? Why are they so critical to that urban fabric of nature? And so I think when we talk about urban trees, we initially think of some of those utilitarian aspects like stormwater capture, carbon sequestration. Trees have been identified as a critical element as part of resilience strategies with rising urban heats. I think we think less about some of the more intangible health and well-being benefits that we get in terms of when we have that interaction with nature, we benefit in terms of our health and well-being. And that's really what we get at with Biophilic Cities and talking about because of all these benefits that we derive, the need to be planning and designing urban spaces so that we can have nature be part of daily life. Um, and then when we talk about mature trees, well, they provide disproportional benefits, right? We focus on them in particular because exponentially they are storing more carbon, they're providing key habitat for biodiversity, and also a lot of those intangibles that is really impossible to put numbers on. But what do they mean in terms of those large trees that are the cornerstones of our community? And they're extremely difficult to replace. Um, with new plantings, a certain percent will be lost within that first year. And then with the dramatic turnover that we see in urban environments, it's hard to guarantee and cultivate those trees to get to be the age of 30 years old, where they are still flourishing and doing well. So when we do have that, they become a valuable, almost unreplaceable resource. So if that's the case, why are we not planning for and designing mechanisms that are retaining those urban trees when we talk about the development of private lands in urban areas? And a lot of what I'll focus on today is US based. So I know that we have an international audience and some of the resources and the policies that we looked at are coming from some of our international partners as well. But thinking about in the US, I think most communities are just not thinking about and planning for that, especially on the private lands. So that's what we sought to get at with our research over the last year. And one of the things we did was convene a work group of some of our partners from the Biophilic Cities network. So these are the urban foresters, planning, public works, gathering to kind of discuss, well, what are the barriers? Why are we not protecting mature trees on private lands? And what are the policies and practices that might change that in the US specifically? And so I think when you look at the barriers and you think about it, it's not just the technical know-how, it's not just the competition for limited space in urban areas, it's lots of different aspects. And so then any strategy that you're going to come up with needs to be addressing kind of these multifaceted aspects. And that's what we try to do with this policy advisory, which is available on our website, so biophilic.cities.org. I also include a link at the end, but as well as my contact information. So if you're having trouble finding the resources, just let me know. But this is all available on our website. And so looking at that policy advisory, we took what was a really large amount of information. We tried to put it into a roadmap of 4 sequential steps to digest all of this information. And so this is the strategy that we put together for private lands. If we're thinking about public lands, it's probably more the steps of 1 and 2. And Tim will be joining us in the second half of today, and he'll be talking about creative strategies for engagement. So really, I think focusing on that second step of this roadmap. But the 4 steps for us are taking stock of the trees that we have available in the urban landscape. So that's having an understanding of the losses, the gains, the areas that are in most need of strategic protection. So that's mapping, data collection, how we value trees, and involving expertise and arborists in the process as early and as often as possible. The second step is really broad stakeholder engagement. And so we are thinking about how do we address those wedge issues that are potentially coming between the protection of mature trees and other challenges and priorities that we have for the urban environment and addressing those directly. And then the crux of our policy advisory is looking at two things. It's step three, which is establishing a regulatory baseline. So this is the sticks and carrots approach. And then once you have that regulatory baseline, once you are setting a floor for what we are asking people to do on private lands, helping those private landowners meet that burden with incentives, with financial support, with technical support in a variety of different ways to make that happen. And we've made all of this available on our website. So we have the policy advisory as well as links to the language of these different policies and the different programs directly through the website. So stepping back to think about kind of that first step in this roadmap, taking stock, we have key findings under each of these four steps. And our first key finding was we are not properly and fully valuing mature trees. So a critical aspect for policy is putting things on par with how we are prioritizing them. So I think a critical aspect of it is how do we value the trees that we are trying to protect? And so Melbourne, Australia has come up with a valuation system. So if we're thinking about the traditional question and cost of replacement is, how many small saplings would we need if we were to take down this big tree? Well, the broader analysis that a place like Melbourne is looking at is not just what does it take to replace that tree in terms of the ecosystem benefits that they are providing, but also some of those more intangible aspects like the aesthetics, like the existence of this tree as a cultural and historical marker in that community, which makes it very difficult to replace, if not impossible. Um, and so once we start thinking about these kind of urban trees, these mature urban trees at that level of valuation, it definitely prioritizes their protection. Places like Edmonton, this photo on the right here, when they protect their public trees, part of what they do when they're putting up the fencing and the protection for the critical root zone is to put a valuation of that tree. That valuation is really looking at more of a cost of replacement, kind of that traditional mechanism. When Melbourne utilizes its valuation protocol, it's valuing things at 25% higher than they would have had otherwise through their traditional valuation. So the second step of this taking stock is utilizing data and tools and sharing that publicly so that you have your partners who are not just in city government, but maybe citizen scientists, advocacy groups, private landowners who are also interested having access to that information. And I think Tim will talk about some of these a little bit more later, including the American Forest Tree Equity Map, which is mapping in the US our urban areas, thinking about where do trees exist, where don't they exist, where do the cities need to strategize for protecting and augmenting that urban canopy. And then our third recommendation is involving arborist expertise as early as often as possible in land development process. In the US, often we are thinking almost from a blank slate when we are developing projects. We're not thinking about the landscape. We're not thinking about the mature trees that might exist. And when you involve that expertise at that early stage, that creates the potential for preserving those trees. Creativity, flexibility in the design, with that open mindset, a lot more is possible. So moving to the second step of our roadmap, stakeholder engagement. And last week I attended a workshop here that was thinking about how do we align the need for affordable housing with the preservation of trees, and thinking about when we want to have thriving communities, it's not just enough to have one or the other. We really need to be thinking about both. And I came across this article from the UK about a very similar workshop. And the takeaway from that workshop was it's not that we don't have the technical expertise or the policies or the creativity, it's really the will. It's creating that new social norm that we want to have communities that do both, that we are going to meet that challenge of both building enough density to provide for folks, but also making sure that those are thriving, healthy places to live. So lots of kind of helpful guidance on this. A great article from 2 years ago called Denser and Greener, which Tim contributed to, is talking about two categories of policies. So it looked at the US, found that there were a variety of places that were doing both the density and the greening, and so took lessons from the approaches from those communities and put them into two broad categories. One is the land sparing, so creating density in one area so that you can preserve large core intact habitat elsewhere. And then the land sharing side of the equation, which is potentially more relevant to what we're talking about today, which is how do we have density and also protect assets like mature trees? Another critical part of stakeholder engagement is creating the case studies to show that it is possible to have both density and tree preservation, and that doesn't necessarily impact your bottom line. So right now we need more information of kind of these successful projects. I put two of them up here on the screen, which are both, we have short films for both of these on biophilic One is a project from Seattle, which was a retrofit of an existing neighborhood. And the redesign of that neighborhood preserved the mature trees that had grown up during the lifetime of that previous project. And then the river bluff down below is probably more of the land sparing type technique, where it was able to preserve a big kind of acreage of trees down by our primary river here in Charlottesville. And then a last piece of the stakeholder engagement is really thinking about the community members who live in these places where we want to be protecting these urban trees. A really wonderful program from the Morton Arboretum in Chicago is a tree ambassador program where they are developing community members who are interested in tree preservation to be the ones that are having those conversations and connecting with the people in the places that they live to talk about the benefits that could be derived from tree preservation, and then also assisting in the challenge of preserving and maintaining mature trees in these landscapes. So turning to kind of the crux of the policy advisory, we created two large tables, one on the regulatory side, and then also on the incentive, the support side. And these are in the policy advisory in two places, actually. In the appendix, there's citations and explanations. But each one of these, you can see on the right, hyperlinks to the code provisions from examples from cities that are utilizing these techniques. And just to look at them kind of broadly, I'll go through them. Although I do want to say at first, especially for the US, we live in a federal system, and so there's the potential for state law preemption. So when we see these policies, there's always a question of, is this something that can be adopted in my jurisdiction? And the answer is it depends. So some states are Dillon rule states in the US, and that's actually the majority of states. And the local jurisdictions are only permitted to be adopting regulations along the lines of what we see here, if there is enabling legislation, so permission from the state. And then on the other side is a home rule state where local jurisdictions have more flexibility unless they are preempted by a specific state law. So I say that because it's always important to have a context for what's possible in your jurisdiction, and what's permissible under your particular state in the US. So a couple big opportunities policy-wise to be protecting and retaining mature trees that we see in place in the US. One is a heritage tree designation. There's other landmark trees, other kind of terminology that's used by local jurisdictions to identify trees of special value, whether because of their age or size, and designating them for heightened protection and retention. Another major technique in terms of regulation is overlay zones. So identifying areas where mature trees have an outsized impact, whether that's places like steep slopes and riparian areas, but also commercial districts, places people want to shop where they see nature and life available. And the trees are well documented to bring back a big impact for those commercial areas. So minimum tree canopy is very common designator. There's no minimum required in the US, but it's something that a lot of jurisdictions use. And we are also thinking about how that's nuanced even within a single city. So there's been lots of great studies, really eye-opening studies in the last year about where we see tree canopy and where we don't, and also where that aligns with historic practices like redlining, that has disadvantaged communities in the past, and we still see it on the face of those cities today in terms of the tree canopy. Another regulatory approach is something called green factor, which is used internationally as well, but thinking about how do we create landscapes that are capturing and treating stormwater, providing us with other benefits. And so thinking about mature trees and giving them the credit due for what they can provide in those landscapes can be a really helpful technique for retaining trees. So the city of Atlanta has two particular interesting policies that I have not seen in lots of other places. One is a no net loss of trees policy, and that plays out in increased retention requirements, permits and fees for removal, but also a tree trust fund. So when there is not compliance with the regulation, money is paid into the potential to buy and preserve forest and mature trees. Sometimes there's funds that go into new plantings, but this is actually looking at how do we use that to kind of maintain what we have and prevent loss. And then another really interesting aspect of it is this public comment period for tree permits. So when you're going to cut down a large tree, there's notice to your neighbors, and there's an opportunity for there to be a conversation about protecting those trees. And so, for example, in the bottom right, that tree was preserved despite originally being designed for as part of a renovation to be cut down because of those conversations that took place. So an interesting process. Regulations also set out lots of techniques that I'm sure many of you are familiar with about protection of these trees during the development process. So the critical root zone identification I put here, more of a traditional kind of definition of the critical root zone, although other jurisdictions are defining it by distance and the like. As well as tree protection bonds. So if you're going to move forward with a project, having a bond that ensures that when you say you're going to protect these trees, if that doesn't happen, that bond exists to replace some of that infrastructure. Really interesting tool from a developer, from an arborist locally, this tree matrix tool is recognizing that although on many of our drawings we are putting these sequential circles, it's much more complex in the urban environment. And so if we want to create a root zone protection, we're going to have to think about where the trees can actually extend their roots and protect those areas. So enforcement is another piece of it. DC is having a really hard time protecting its large trees with just fines. So despite raising the fines to a very high amount, we're still seeing the cutting of mature trees as a cost of doing development. And so the city adopted a stop work order as another method to control whether these trees are being protected during the development process. So turning to the last area, last piece of our roadmap, is this I think, kind of where we're seeing the most interesting kind of innovative type techniques. And this is thinking about, well, if you have those requirements and those regulations, how can you support and share that burden? And again, we have another very large table that you should all look at from the policy advisory. And some of these you might be familiar with from your own jurisdictions. So, for example, in Seattle, if you are able to protect a mature tree, you'll be permitted to develop higher or maybe push the boundaries into buffer areas that you might otherwise have been allowed to with equivalent development. Two different TDR approaches. This is more of a traditional transfer of development where you have increased development in one area and then taking that value and preserving areas in this larger region around Seattle and King County. But Portland is thinking about, well, how do we do that within the city and in small sections of the city themselves? So if you have a single parcel of land that has those mature trees, how do you protect those mature trees? And then any development and density that you're losing because of that tree preservation, you can take that and transfer that to a different property that can build bigger and provide more housing on a different site. So to me, that's a really interesting and creative approach. And then Hawaii has a wonderful program. So if you have an exceptional tree, which is kind of another definition for that heritage tree, we know that there's a cost for the individual homeowner and landowner for protecting that tree. And that sometimes is the reason why those trees are not getting protected. So the state of Hawaii will give you a $3,000 property tax deduction to help you with the cost of maintaining those large trees. So kind of a direct response and recognition of the cost that comes with protecting those trees. And then, for those with more technical background, just a whole variety of different techniques that you all are familiar with, likely, for protecting those trees, but that the individual homeowners and maybe not even the small scale developer will be familiar with. And so part of having tree preservation is sometimes just giving the technical support, whether it's from the city staff or from arborists that individual landowners can work with and collaborate with. So that's a quick overview of our policy advisory. We are having a symposium, as I mentioned, next week to launch the vision and practice of forest urbanism. And Tim will talk about that a little bit more. But what we are talking about here is an expanded vision for what trees provide in that urban landscape as a means to value and protect them. So you can find more on biophiliccities.org, and there's a link to the policy advisory as well as my own email. But now we'll turn to Tim Beatley. And thanks, Tim, for joining us. I get actually the pleasure of introducing Tim. I've never had that pleasure before, but Tim has been a longtime professor at the University of Virginia, has written many books, and really kind of been there at the evolution of what it means for nature in cities. Biophilic Cities was, I think, is more than 10 years old, and our research program is more than 10 years old, but it's really evolved, I think, and taken a life of its own, and we've seen it applied in many different communities. So Tim is really a global influencer, if you will. And so, Tim, thanks for joining us and sharing on the creative strategies.
Well, thanks, JD. I hope you can hear me okay. Let me know if you can't.
Yeah,
and JD, you're going to help me with time, and please give me like a 5-minute warning if you could. And I'm trying to kind of minimize all the. You had some great questions coming out of the Q&A, and I'm going to just get rid of that. So yeah, I'm not sure, JD, that I'm going to talk terribly much about the Forest Urbanism Center or the symposium, but for me, this is a wonderful thing to talk about and talk a little bit about some of the background for me and why I'm concerned about trees. There are a number of creative community engagement strategies and stories and tools that I'm going to just quickly go through very fast, but there's a lot more information about these things in a book called Canopy Cities, a Routledge Press book, and then a couple of recent essays in a collected blog called The Nature of Cities. We can send links to those a little bit later. But for me, a lot of this revolves around what we do at the neighborhood level. And for me, it grows out of a lot of personal frustration about the loss of mature trees in my own neighborhood. And I've been writing a lot about this idea of the psychology around trees and how we need all the things that JD went through, all those steps and all those tools, the codes and so on. But my big message, I think, is that we need also to be changing the psychology around trees. So these are images from my neighborhood in Charlottesville, and a stressful circumstance in which a neighbor who I don't know ended up cutting down 3 very large trees in their front yard, very healthy trees from my perspective, and I don't understand why. And now we walk along the street. There is a hot zone. In fact, in the summer it was quite extreme, where these trees used to provide shade and evapotranspiration. So my wife suggested that maybe I should go and spray paint the question why on the stumps of the trees. This is probably not a good idea. I would not recommend anybody do that, but it has set off in me a sort of bigger search for some of the meaning behind this. And it is about psychology to a large degree. It's about maybe the way we traditionally think about trees. They are private property. We think of them as inanimate. Many of us, we think of cutting down a tree as something akin to changing the color of the paint in your house. And so part of this insight is that if this is about psychology, it's also about how do we engage people in a better understanding of trees and changing that psychology in big and small ways. I'm not going to go through all of this diagram. I have to give a lot of credit to David Eastman, who came up with a kind of political theory called the systems view of politics, and with feedback loops and the impact of the larger environment and the norms in a community. All those things I think are in fact really quite important. JD talked about the importance of codes. Codes are really important. Here's the example again of the Washington Canopy Protection Act, which has its problems, but I also think is pretty good. And if the more it is stringently enforced, the better it will be. But it's important to say that codes are also moral signals. So even a code that is not as strong as we'd like it to be, or not as enforced to the degree that we want it to be, it's still sending a signal. And it still has an impact on the psychology of the way we look at trees, that trees have an importance. They have there's a legal restraint. The trees are not just simply to be cut down willy-nilly. A lot of the wonderful tools JD talked about in the form of incentives. A lot of work is happening, and some of the things they're happening so fast we haven't been able even to capture them. So one of the things we've been advocating for a long time is changing the way we tax property owners and homeowners, and the idea of maybe even making adjustments to the local property tax system to take into account the ecosystem benefits that are provided by the trees that you voluntarily protect. And we don't have very many good examples in American communities of having places that have done this, but this is actually a brand new example from Australia, the city of Canning, the Council of Canning in Western Australia, where they have now adopted a code or an ordinance that basically gives homeowners the chance to receive as much as 200 Australian dollars per tree. These have to be significant trees, and they have to be protected as significant trees, but $200 per tree per year. So the idea that once you begin to have this income flow, even a modest income yearly annual payment, it's less likely that you are going to be cutting down those trees. And so we have lots of examples: stormwater fees and other kinds of fees. We're subsidizing the replacement of water intensive lawns, and especially in Western cities. So we have a lot of precedents for doing more of this. in Canning, they went through this really interesting discussion about whether it should just be subtracted from your property taxes or whether it should be its own distinct payment that the property owner receives. And they decided on the latter because that would highlight it, and actually the feeling that it might be just simply overlooked or forgotten if it were subtracted from a property tax. So these changed the psychology of things. And by the way, Ben Koons is the council member who has spearheaded this idea. And partly for him, you see the image of black cockatoos. He volunteers at a cockatoo rescue organization, and a lot of the reason for saving those big, large eucalyptus trees is that they are really important. Cavities are important for nesting black cockatoos. So I do think a lot of this has to happen at the neighborhood level. I'm often saying it takes a village, it takes a wooded village, and even with a strong tree protection code, it takes eyes and ears of people out in the community watching and reporting when something happens and questioning when things happen. And so a lot of what I would argue for is that we need to cultivate a different set of norms at the neighborhood scale in those places where we feel and see and experience trees. So I'll use my neighbor across the street, neighbor Roberta. Won't give you her last name, but one of the reasons she bought her house was this spectacular willow oak. And we are often having conversations about that oak. And I now go out of my way, in fact, to have conversations with neighbors in my neighborhood and to tell them how beautiful their trees are. It's really hard for someone to cut down a tree if they think the neighbors around them care about that tree and will be feel harmed when that tree is cut down. And so I'm thinking a lot about this idea of who are the leaders in the neighborhood and how do we cultivate those leaders. And the folks in sociology sometimes talk about this as norm drivers. And you see here Deborah Pearson. She's a retired high school teacher in Atlanta. She's a norm driver. She's created this essentially public forest, protected forest in her backyard. She engages in conversation with her neighbors about converting their yards to forests and native plant plantings and so on. And we have a short film on the biophiliccities.org page, on the film page, about Deborah. Really wonderful story. We need more people like Deborah. And so she actually told us when we went to film at her house, she told us this story about hearing a chainsaw in the front yard of her next door neighbor. She went running out, and someone was cutting down a beautiful older white oak tree. So she knocked on the door and began a heated conversation with her neighbor, and essentially talked her neighbor into stopping the cutting of the tree. We saw the tree; some of it has been cut, but most of it was remaining and healthy. So we need those sorts of leaders, and we have increasingly lots of examples of them. This is one that I've gotten to learn about recently. Had a wonderful conversation with her by phone. Bonnie Bolton is trying to protect a 200-year-old live oak tree in Coral Gables. And so often the people, of course, around a tree or around a forest that care the most about it, if we can enlist their help and their passion. So you see she's presenting actually an alternative development plan that will save the tree and this historic garden. It's yet to be resolved. She's also put forward a very creative proposal for swapping a piece of city-owned land for this land. So in other words, allowing the private development to take place on a different site and essentially a parking lot. So we want to think about what kinds of arguments we make about this and how we can equip people to stand up and protect those trees around them. JD already mentioned this particular story, Bryant Heights, but we have a short film about this. Would love for you to watch it. And part of this was about how when this redevelopment happened, the trees and the grove that was already there was already a beloved place in the neighborhood. And so part of what motivated this conservation of the trees is essentially a different way of developing than usually happens, right? They started with the conservation and the protection of the trees, and the homes on the right were set back from this grove. The The Douglas fir was in fact the centerpiece of the courtyard. They've moved the parking around so that they haven't cut as many trees, and it's really quite spectacular. A lot of other creative things that neighborhoods are doing, that people in cities are doing this earlier this fall, a month ago about, or a little longer than that. Wrap the Forest group in Asheville actually opposing the potential cutting down of a 45-acre forest by the University of North Carolina at Asheville to build a soccer stadium. Plenty of other places to build that soccer stadium. And so they went out in dramatic fashion on a Saturday morning and took this and basically wrapped the forest in sheets. You see some of the words on those sheets. So remarkable things that are going on, remarkable resistance, remarkable building of community capability to protect those forests. It takes, of course, training and education, and there are many examples of tree keeper or tree steward programs around the country. I very much like the Tree Keepers program that Open Lands runs in Chicago. I think it's probably the gold standard. There are now 2,200 certified neighborhood foresters. Once you get certified, you get credentials, you get a badge, you have the legal ability to prune city trees and to do work on city land. I did a little video chat with this husband and wife team, Colleen Thorpe and Rick Gillies. They go out once, they're retired now, they go out one day a week and prune. And there's a social dimension to this. It's fun. It connects with other people. It's doing something important for the city. We need more folks like this. And Tom Ebeling, who runs this program, says, that these are eyes on the trees and really important. And if something is happening, a tree is about to be cut down or lost and removed along a street or a neighborhood, it's often a tree keeper who calls the ward office and complains to the city council member for that ward. So I think there's a lot that we can do at the neighborhood level if we give neighborhoods the tools to do this. This example of the Wolseley neighborhood in Winnipeg, where they are taking on the task of raising money to inoculate trees there against the Dutch elm disease, or a really interesting example from Toronto. I know we have a few folks from Canada here, where this beautiful, very old red oak tree, probably the oldest and largest tree in the city of Toronto, was going to be cut down. And the neighborhood actually got together and raised money in combination with funds put up by the city to actually buy the property and to turn it into a small park. Really wonderful story of what you can do at that neighborhood level. The story, I know some folks are from Seattle, just watching the chat box, and this is the story of the Western red cedar named Luma. Part of the way of changing the psychology about trees is to actually give some of those trees names, and to learn from the Native American view of trees as standing people, right? So in the Wedgwood neighborhood, this tree was going to be cut down for a development. Local tree activists sprang into action. What you see are people occupying the tree, got a lot of attention in the news media, and not that we all need to be climbing into trees and doing this, but it turned out this was a culturally significant tree, culturally modified tree. It has importance for local indigenous tribes, and for a lot of reasons, it then was protected and protected, and the developer was able to proceed actually by redesigning the units. Really interesting. The tree firm that was going to cut the tree down actually decided not to once they learned more about it. Idea of changing the psychology of the trees and forests around us. We can infuse the trees and forests with a sense of sacredness, and sacredness comes from many things that in our lives. I love this little book about shikake, is this Japanese idea of nudging. So their evidence suggests actually that when you erect a torii gate, at least this works in Japan, that people don't litter, they care for the environment a little better. They're more likely to protect trees and forests around. Tories are often gateways into Shinto temples, and and indications that you're moving into sacred land. What are the ways of infusing sacredness in a more North American context? It's an open question. By the way, I'd love for you all, anybody here has a great story, a great idea, a great strategy that you would like to share, we would love to hear from you. Forests and trees will also be protected if they are places that we care about, places that we go. There's a kind of a really important placemaking element to this as well. Come to really admire the organization Missouri Forest Relief. We had the chance 2 weeks ago actually to do some interviewing and making a small film about them, and spending some time with Rebecca Hankins there in their nursery, and telling us actually about the story of how trees in an underserved neighborhood in St. Louis have been protected and preserved as a result of community art. This idea of these traditional wraps, and kind of infusing the trees that were just planted with almost a sense of sacredness in the neighborhood. Lots of you know about this organization.
A 5-minute warning.
Okay, 5-minute warning.
Maybe we can have
I only have about a half an hour left.
A few
JD.
minutes at the end.
Yeah, I'll at this point, I think I'll just really quickly go through the rest of the slides. One of the interesting things, of course, disturbing things about what's happening with climate change is we're losing a lot of trees to weather events. A big tornado that hit St. Louis, thousands of trees down. And one of the really interesting ways of connecting with people around the trauma and how to recover from the trauma is raising funds and planting trees. It's a lot of what Missouri Forest Relief does. They are co-sponsoring this Halloween Trick or Tree. So kids are going out and actually seeking donations to help fund the planting and the restoration. JD's already talked about this story. I do think giving residents a more active role in the protection of trees and making that role formal, the ability to appeal a tree removal permit, as was mentioned in Atlanta. We have a short film about this as well on the Biophilic Cities page. And as JD says, the result of having this appeal and this tree conservation commission, whose job it is to protect trees, basically convinced the developer that they needed to move the driveway to the other side to protect this wonderful southern red oak, and to set the home back a little bit. And that's all it took to protect that land. Do think we need to engage others in the community, churches in particular. Wonderful story of the Still Meadow Community Fellowship Peace Park in Baltimore, 10-acre forest owned by the church, and it's this place that's many people come together. I did want to introduce the idea of tree rituals and tree traditions. We have a number of them. Some of them are connected to colleges and universities, like Elon University, whereas when you join that university or that college, you are given an acorn. And then as you graduate, you're given an oak tree to plant. And a lot of traditions with similar import and impact around the world. In India, there is this tradition of celebrating the relationship between sisters and brothers, and it's now understood as an opportunity to talk about the importance of trees and putting these traditional Rockies, actually beautiful Rockies, these little wrist bands around trees. Really wonderful. Gratitude gatherings. Whenever we lose a tree, acknowledging that that tree is coming down. This is something that's been happening in Seattle. I have to give a big shout out to Sandy Shetler on the left and Megan McKieran on the right, who sort of started this idea. There are two trees that are coming down, and there are about 40 people who have gathered there. Neighborhood tree walks and tree talks. Lots of wonderful examples from around the country. And I had the chance to follow Diana Beresford Kroger in a wonderful tree walk, medicine walk, and High Park in Toronto. Wonderful story there. How can we layer the stories of the human stories that connect to trees How do we do that? We can do that with the technology that we have. So this website called Canopy Stories that Vivek Shandis and his colleagues have developed for Portland, where you can go in and actually upload your story and actually hover around and find other stories about trees, and the power of having QR codes that take you to maps. The whole idea of community forest maps or neighborhood tree maps, the power of tree maps. We have now 6 Milwaukee forests here on the UVA campus, and they're all connected to a story map. And these are often very powerful things to do. Many cities have pretty sophisticated online tree maps. This is the one in Washington, D.C., or probably the gold standard is New York City. Can be a very powerful tool for seeing what trees you have around, and for coordinating care of those trees, watering of those trees, standing up when those trees, in fact, are in jeopardy, and also calculating the ecological and economic benefits. A couple of quick things, a lot of really wonderful stories, using digital tools to reconnect us to trees. Many of you know the story in Melbourne where they gave every existing tree its own email address, and the original idea was, in fact, to facilitate the reporting, the monitoring of trees in your neighborhood, and the reporting of trees that needed care. What they discovered was people were sending these beautiful love notes to their trees. So 77,000 trees, many of them have had love notes sent, Valentines from residents in that city. For the current generation of kids, texting is the way they do things, not emails. So we've had a number of really cool experiments. This is Julietta Sorensen Cass, who has done this wonderful thing of actually identifying 15 trees, giving them names, appointing people who then serve as a voice for those trees, and encouraging everyone to send a text with a question or something to share with that tree, building a kind of psychological connection to the tree. So this is a story that's told actually in Nadina Ghali's book, The Nature of Our Cities. We've gotten to know Nadina quite well. Highly recommend that book, and there are other stories in addition to that one. So I need to stop, but I did want to, I would have had I had another half an hour, told you about the role of art and public art in particular. Tree Wonder, a program in Washington Square Park in New York, where every Sunday our friend Georgia Silvera Siemens actually helps people draw this probably the oldest tree in Manhattan. You can go online and find all the trees, all the examples of the drawings that people have made. I do this in my own class, where I ask students to to find their favorite tree on grounds on campus, and then to draw it and to spend time with it and to learn as much as possible about it. The last thing I'll say is that we have a lot of really clever ways of raising awareness at a community level. A number of, several cities that have done some form of walking for us. This is my favorite example of Leeuwarden, a city in the north of Holland, or north of the Netherlands, and where they basically designed this bespoke cart that has trees, and the community comes together to push those trees into spaces to demonstrate what an instant forest, in a sense, will do, and how that can change the nature of a place. So we're seeing this in lots of other places. Moving forest in Toronto, starting at the Bentway. They're really interesting. And then a few slides at the end. I'm going to skip to the very end because I am completely out of power, completely out of time, maybe out of power as well. And I'll stop there. Okay, let me stop sharing. JD, sorry, that was really fast and
I
furious.
think a lot of people really like the ideas, and it's a huge amount of ideas. If people want to learn more, biophilic has not only presentations from Tim, but others working in this realm, lots of films and the like. And then Canopy Cities has a lot of these stories as well, a lot of these resources. So thanks, everybody.
Do we have any time for questions?
I think we might be at time.
Yeah,
I think we are at time. But if JD and Tim, I will gather these questions and send them to you. Feel free to, fill them out as you're able to. So this presentation, along with those questions and their report that they completed when they finished their research program, will be found on our archives page, our webinar archives page. So it will take a while for us to get that onto YouTube and for them to get their questions back. But for all those that attended, thank you. We will send you a follow-up email with those links and this information and as able. And again, thank you, Tim and JD for your work and your passion and your care for for our trees and the cities and the people that also care for them. So thank you all.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah,
Great
thanks.
questions.
Yeah, fantastic presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Great comments coming in. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. It was great to see everyone. With that, we will bring the webinar to a close and see y'all in a few weeks for our next webinar here at Tree Fund. Thank you.